All right, guys, welcome to the Carl Jackson Show, your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. Please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you go to get your podcast: Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and Rumble. Guys, we're going to have Zach Smith of the Heritage Foundation joining us today to talk about the crisis at the Texas border, or at the southern border. I wanted to make sure that I got an attorney that had a conservative worldview on, an originalist worldview, a constitutional worldview, to answer some of my questions, but just some things that I wanted to bring to you, just some thoughts real quick as I go through my paperwork here. This border issue is the most important issue, obviously, this week. What we see happening on the border, I think Texas Governor Greg Abbott, I guess he could have done this all along. I'm glad he's doing this now. It's something that has to be done. He's staying strong. The Supreme Court has come in with Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice John Roberts siding with the liberals in the court, basically saying the federal government can, while this case is being heard in the lower courts, the federal government can come in and cut the razor wire that Governor Greg Abbott, along with the Texas National Guard, or the Texas National Guard, has installed in Eagle Pass, Texas, where basically an area where a lot of illegal aliens are coming through. The governor has defied that order, essentially, and he's like, nope, it's not going to happen. He's defying the lawlessness of the Biden administration, and I am so glad he's doing it. So we're going to bring on the legal expert in just a second here, but I just want to share with you what's at stake. We all know what's happening. We all know what's happening, and what's happening is, again, the Democrat Party has given it away. The representative from, I forget, Yvette Clarke, I believe her name was. I've mentioned this several times. You guys heard me play the clip, I believe it was last week or a couple of weeks ago, where basically Yvette Clarke of New York was saying, listen, basically scolding Mayor Eric Adams, although she didn't say it by name, didn't call him out by name, but essentially saying, hey, wait a minute, we want this illegal immigration. I definitely want it for my district because I need more numbers. I need more bodies. In the Constitution, when it comes to the census and all this kind of stuff, if you grow the population, or the population grows in a given congressional district or geographical location, it doesn't matter if those people are citizens or not. The left has an advantage of getting representation, meaning the more people, the more congressional seats they can have. And that's exactly what they're looking to do. They don't want their districts to end up going red. They want to make sure that more Democrats are in their district. And so what do? They import Democrats. And that's exactly what they're hoping for. They want these people to stay in the shadow. They want these people to remain victims so that they can constantly be used. So this issue can constantly be used as a cudgel against Republicans. Because let's face it, Americans have a short-term memory, and here's what's going to happen. The left will show pictures and videos of illegal immigrants and, a bad situation somewhere, homeless, this and that, and they'll start playing the violins, and, imagine if Republicans, with just fun housing, that's what they'll do. That's what they're going to do, but you have to know what's at stake. You have fentanyl coming across the border. You saw the video that we played last week where a guy coming across the border said, listen, you guys aren't smart enough to know who I am. And I'm paraphrasing, you're going to know who I am. Turns out this guy had spent some years, nearly or just over a decade in prison for terrorist activity. And so thank God he was dumb enough to say that stuff on video and be seen on video. Otherwise, he may have gotten away. But that's what we're dealing with. And not only that, we're dealing with this fentanyl crisis in the United States, where I do believe that it is just like, in my opinion, just like the Wuhan virus, if you will. You're dealing with a fentanyl crisis primarily due to China and then Mexican cartels, right? And you're killing off a lot of Americans that probably young Americans that are military age. Meanwhile, you have the left importing military age men from different countries. Now, here's something that's fascinating. Zero Hedge wrote about this before we get to our guest. Who are the most right-wing Americans? And they took a look at the ethnic origins of people, and come to find out, Here's what the stats basically bear out. So most white people support Republicans, all right? So that's no surprise. While most non-white people support the Democrats. And then in the 2020 election, 57% of whites voted for Trump compared to 32% of Hispanics, 31% of Asians, 12% of blacks. And so what makes up this difference? The Democrats can look at those stats and they can say, okay, when the borders are open, or if we open up the borders, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to allow whites to come in from Europe, or at least Northern Europe. I'll get into that in just a sec. But everywhere else around the world, these people... Yes, I said these people tend to vote Democrat. And so that's what we want to do. We want to bring people in that will likely vote Democrat. So again, Zero Hedge wrote a fantastic column, What's at Stake in Biden's border war with Texas. All right. So again, what are who are the most right-wing Americans? Again, whites overwhelmingly vote Republican, so on, etc. But they say we can examine these using data. Oh, they say, but what about differences between more fine-grained groups such as English Americans versus Irish Americans? So they say we can examine these using data from what's called the General Social Survey. That includes a question on the respondent's ethnic origin. Specifically, he or she is asked, quote, from what countries or part of the world did your ancestors come? All right, and the GSS has a very large sample size when the various waves are combined, and they write it is feasible to examine differences between many ethnic origins and groups. So differences in political views, they mapped this out, and they showed that there's a relatively clear pattern. Americans of Northern European origin are the most conservative. All right. So that's one. And then those of Southern and Eastern European origin are intermediate. And then those of Asian African, or American origin are the least conservative. So among Europeans, you have the Swiss, the Dutch, and the British that are the most conservatives. While Lithuanians, Russians, and Romanians are the least conservatives. And then among Asians, Chinese are the most conservative, and Indians are the least. All right. Interestingly, they write Arabs are the second least conservative, which is somewhat expected, though less so when you consider that they're highly selected, meaning highly selected as in our... You know that lottery system where we import more Democrats basically from the Middle East? All right, just consider, what's that chick's name? The Congresswoman, not Rashida Tlaib, but the other one. I forget her name, but she was part of the, she always wears a little turban or whatever that's called. But it says here the pattern for European origins group is consistent with the contemporary variation in economic freedom across countries. Generally speaking, economic freedom is higher in Northern Europe and somewhat lower in Southern Europe. So basically, here's what's happening. The left understands that if you curtail immigration from Northern Europe specifically, but if you allow open borders for virtually every other country around the world, the chances are that you're going to import Democrats is high. And that is exactly what they're doing. It's about importing Democrats. It is about replacement theory. Regardless of how much the left says they're not trying to replace Americans, that is exactly what they're doing. Guys, this is a crucial issue. The border issue is crucial. We should all be calling our congressmen and senators at 202-224, I believe it's 7121. But anyway, just look up, Google your congressman or woman and your senator, and you can find their numbers. And I would encourage you to call, because the Senate is working along with the Democrat Party to do what? Absolutely nothing. Both of these parties don't care about, they both want cheap labor. They both don't want to fight against the issue, especially in an election cycle. It's sad. It's scary. You have Langford, Senator John Langford working with the left behind closed doors to try to get a deal to encompass Ukraine, Israel, borders, and all that kind of stuff. And all the right continues to do is just capitulate to the left. The first thing that needs to be done is a wall needs to be erected, a physical barrier. I understand there are places where a wall is not doable, and for that we can, obviously we can use whatever other technology or methods we need to use to keep the border secure as possible so we can stop this invasion. But a wall, we have to stop the bleeding. We have to stop the bleeding. All right, so now I want to go to my guest, Zach Smith of the Heritage Foundation. Again, don't forget as well to support our sponsor, mypillow.com, providing American jobs and American manufacturing. And right now they have deals galore. All you have to do is give them a call at 800-858-0263. That is 800-858-0263, and use my name, Carl, C-A-R-L, or go to the radio podcast square and enter my name, Carl, C-A-R-L, and then there are a gang of, or lots of deals, I shouldn't say gang, there are lots of deals that are available to you. All right, so again, American jobs, American manufacturing, a great night's rest, great products that are made by Americans. So if you're going to buy some products that are on mypillow.com, from a Target or something, don't bother. Just go to mypillow.com. Get a discount. Support American jobs, American manufacturing, great quality products that you'll love, all right? And get some excellent discounts as well, along with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. Without any further ado, my guest, Zach Smith of the Heritage Foundation, is going to join me now to talk about the crisis at the border. Welcome to the Carl Jackson Show, your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. Guys, I want to get right to the point with my guest, Zach Smith, constitutional attorney at the Heritage Foundation. Obviously, what we're talking about today is the crisis, I guess, at the Texas border, or the standoff between Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, and the Biden administration. Greg Abbott has erected a bunch of barbed wire, basically, or razor wire, and just saying, hey, listen, these illegal immigrants are not going to be able to come past this particular point in Texas. You have the Supreme Court that weighed in with Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice John Roberts siding with the liberals on the court, saying, hey, at least temporarily while this case is resolved, you're going to have to cut or remove the razor wire. You have Governor Abbott that defied that order, and I'm glad he did. And so basically what I wanted to do is bring on an attorney that understands the law to talk about this type of stuff, even though, I'm joined by Zach Smith of the Heritage Foundation. Zach, yet again, we find ourselves in unprecedented territory.
Well, that's exactly right, Carl, and I appreciate you having me on. And, every time I come on, I feel like I say we're facing an unprecedented situation, but we really are. We live in fascinating times. And again, this is really an unprecedented legal situation, and really an unfortunate one that could have been completely avoided if President Joe Biden and his administration had simply done their jobs and protected our southern border.
Go ahead.
Well, no, look, I was just going to say, I think it's important to put blame where blame is due. And the Biden administration, Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, deserve all the blame, essentially, for refusing to do their jobs and protect our southern border.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that most sensible Americans would agree with that. I'm of the opinion that the Democrat Party is intentionally importing Democrats, people that they hope will be unassimilated and a perpetual underclass. But I guess that's besides the point. Dealing specifically, Zach, with the border issue, here you have Governor Greg Abbott defying the Supreme Court. I feel like the left does this all the time, frankly. and I don't think I'm being hyperbolic in saying that, but to see a Republican do it is a big deal. But I think Governor Greg Abbott had to do it. I think he had to defy the Supreme Court. So what I'm wondering is, what are the ramifications of that? Can the Supreme Court do anything about it? Do they have any type of authority to turn this ship around?
Well, I'm going to push back on that characterization, Carl, because I don't actually think Greg Abbott has defied the Supreme Court. And I think it's important to understand the posture of this case and exactly what the court order said and what its implications are to understand what's happening on the ground. And so to unpack it, we have to understand what's happening on the ground. The federal government wasn't doing its job, wasn't protecting the southern border. So essentially, Governor Greg Abbott stepped in and used Texas resources to try to stem the flow of illegal aliens that were coming across the southern border. That included, he posted Texas state troopers there. He posted Texas National Guard members there. And in certain areas, he also ordered that razor wire be put up, essentially a barrier to prevent illegal immigrants from coming across the border. Now, the Biden administration sued Greg Abbott. They said that this violated the separation of powers, federalism, because it's essentially the role of the federal government to exclusively enforce immigration laws, which is somewhat ironic since they are refusing to do so. But essentially, while this case was being litigated, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, the lower federal appellate court, entered an injunction that essentially said, while the case is being litigated, the federal government cannot cut, it cannot remove the razor wire and other barriers that Greg Abbott had ordered to be put at the southern border. And so all the Supreme Court did, they lifted that injunction. They lifted that prohibition on the federal government and said that the federal government can, in fact, cut the razor wire and remove the barriers. It doesn't say anything about Greg Abbott being able to erect further barriers. It doesn't say anything about Greg Abbott being able to station troops, guard members, Texas state troopers, other personnel at the southern border. All the Supreme Court said is that while this case is being litigated, the federal government can actively remove those barriers. And so based on that, I don't think Greg Abbott has actually defied the Supreme Court's order. And now the Biden administration, frankly, from a practical perspective, is in the uncomfortable position of either affirmatively going in, being seen to actually be opening the southern border, or to continue this litigation and allowing Greg Abbott to essentially get the political win here, even though he's not really defying the Supreme Court order. It's certainly the perception that he has the upper hand politically, I think, over the Biden administration in this case. And so it's a fascinating situation, and one that's, again, really of the Biden administration's own making.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you bring up the political point. Obviously, that's where I would want to go. I'm kind of surprised to hear you go there first, but I'm glad you did. It's I think this would be a disaster for the Biden administration if they were to come in, and there's no way they could argue the fact that, hey, listen, we're trying to seal up the border. Republicans aren't doing anything about it. They aren't working with us. If literally he sends border agents down or federal law enforcement to cut through the razor wire and open the razor wire, I think that argument is completely gone. I think it will be devastating for the Biden administration. We've just seen both in Iowa and in New Hampshire where the main issues were the immigration policies. You're talking about the Midwest and up north. So if it's impacting them, man, this does not bode well for the Biden administration. There's something I want to hone in on to what you said. Again, I want to get some clarity. So the Fifth Circuit said that the razor wire could remain. The Supreme Court came in and said the razor wire could be cut, basically?
Basically, yes. Essentially, the Fifth Circuit, they said that while this is being litigated, we're going to maintain the status quo. The federal government can't go in and cut the razor wire. The Supreme Court said, no, while this is being litigated, the federal government can go in and cut the razor wire if they want to.
Okay, and so here's something else that you touched on that I thought was fascinating, and I actually heard Kyle Seraphin, former FBI agent, whistleblower, talk about this briefly on Dan Bongino's show yesterday, and I wanted to get your take on it. I thought it was a fascinating point. He said if the federal government came in and cut the razor wire, why not just put barbed wire or some type of other barrier? So essentially, Greg Abbott could continue playing the game as well. Just like you said earlier, Zach, the order doesn't say anything about putting troops on the border, so on, et cetera. So Greg Abbott could continue with the upper hand if he wanted to, just by using different types of barriers. Does that make sense? Would that even fly?
Potentially it's, whatever Greg Abbott does, it's going to be challenged in court. Keep in mind, he previously ordered, buoys put in the Rio Grande River. Yeah. That was challenged in court. And a lot of this goes back to, Carl, a lot of this dispute goes back to a case called Arizona versus United States. It's several years old. I think it was wrongly decided, where essentially the Supreme Court said that the states play no role in enforcing federal immigration laws, meaning that states essentially can't stop someone they suspect solely for being an illegal immigrant or illegal alien who's come across the border illegally. They have no role. And so I think that decision has really handcuffed a lot of states in their ability to combat the current crisis, not only Texas, but other border states as well. And so I think essentially what is going to happen is Texas or Arizona or another state is going to have to essentially be willing to challenge that Supreme Court decision and ask the Supreme Court to reconsider it and potentially to overturn it.
What is the name of that case again, Zach?
Arizona versus United States.
Okay. Was that when Governor, was it Jan Brewer, was in office? Is that when that occurred?
I would have to go back and look. It is several years old now. Okay. It was from the early 2010s. I believe it was 2012 when that case was decided. But this is really where a lot of the current issues stem from, is that decision, which I think was wrongly decided.
Okay, yeah, I think that is when Jan Brewer was challenging Obama at the time, when so many illegal immigrants were, especially undocumented children, were coming through our southern border. I believe, now obviously you would know better than me, but this is me just, I think I remember that. Obviously I don't remember the case, but I think I remember that. Here's something that that has been on everyone's mind. In the event, and I'm not convinced that he would do it, but there are at least, if I recall correctly, let me pull this up real quick on Town Hall. If I'm not mistaken, basically the Biden administration is saying, hey, if we want to, we can nationalize, and he's being encouraged to nationalize the Texas National Guard to work on behalf of the federal government, as opposed to Greg Abbott. Can he do that, for one? And if he did that, is there anything that Governor Greg Abbott could do at that point?
Yeah, I've seen that as well. And, the analogy that's often used is Dwight D. Eisenhower nationalized the National Guard during the Civil Rights era to try to enforce, desegregation in the Deep South. But look, this is a completely different situation. I think the governor, Greg Abbott, other governors would push back against that. Don't forget as well, many other states have committed to send their own National Guard members, their own resources to the southern border to help, including law enforcement, state troopers, local sheriffs have committed to send deputies, other officers to the southern border to help Texas. And so, again, I think just, I do policy, not politics, at the Heritage Foundation, but just from a practical perspective, that seems like it would be a very unwise move for the Biden administration to make. One other thing I want to go back to, if we can, Carl, you mentioned earlier about the border and crime and drug trafficking being among the top concerns of voters around the country. I think Greg Abbott, Ron DeSantis, other governors deserve a lot of credit for essentially busing and flying migrants to many of these so-called sanctuary cities around the country, places like New York, Chicago, San Francisco, just to name a few, because it's really highlighted really the hypocrisy that many on that left have with this issue. Because it was easy for places like Chicago and New York to ignore the crisis at the southern border when it essentially wasn't their problem. But now that they are being confronted with many of the issues that are resulting from the southern border crisis, they're singing a very different tune now. And I think more and more Americans are starting to draw the direct connection between what is happening in their communities, particularly as it pertains to the fentanyl crisis that so many cities are experiencing, particularly as it pertains to issues surrounding human trafficking, which the southern border has allowed to flourish. I think more and more people are starting to draw that connection. And so in that sense, it's unfortunately we are at this point where so many cities, so many people are suffering. But I think it's a good thing that more and more people are starting to draw that direct connection.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Let me ask you about this. The Texas National Guard, let's say, versus Border Patrol. Are we looking at something that could get nasty or violent potentially? Where and I don't suspect anything like this would happen, Zach. But I'm just curious for myself. You have the Texas National Guard, obviously under the authority of Governor Greg Abbott, the Border Patrol right now under the authority of the federal government, the Biden administration. Could there be conflict there potentially? I mean, that really concerns me.
Well, I certainly hope. I think we all hope it doesn't get to that point. I would hope that cooler heads would prevail. And look, one of the things to keep in mind about the Supreme Court's decision, all of this is taking place in a preliminary posture while the litigation is ongoing. And so there's a very good chance that the Supreme Court can and will hear issues surrounding this conflict on the merits. And so there are a lot of off-ramps for both the Biden administration and the Supreme Court to take in helping to resolve this issue. And I think we are all hopeful that, cooler heads will prevail. And, look, Carl, at the end of the day, all of this, again, can be avoided if the Biden administration would simply do its job and enforce the immigration laws that are on the books.
Yeah, and obviously they have no intention of doing that whatsoever. They're obviously playing the political game that, hey, this is all the Republicans' fault. If they would only work with us on this major budget deal and all this kind of nonsense, they have no intentions of doing that. Are you surprised, Zach? I hate to act like I'm surprised, but I kind of am that Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice John Roberts would side with the liberals on this ruling. I really gotta be honest. I don't understand it. I'm at a point where I feel like when it comes to originalist justices and Republicans appointing justices to the Supreme Court, why do we seem to get, and maybe I'm wrong here, but why do we seem to get these weak-kneed people that are just that just seem to capitulate to the left rather than follow the law? I don't even know why they would side with the liberals on this issue.
Yeah, I was disappointed to see that as well, Carl. One of the things about this order is we don't know why the justices ruled like they did. Again, this was in a preliminary posture at the Supreme Court, meaning it didn't go through the normal, full-blown briefing process that a case would get because the justices were being asked to rule very quickly. And so as a result of that, they didn't issue written opinions, like you typically think of the Supreme Court issuing, where they explain their rationale, why they ruled a certain way. All they did was a short one-page order basically saying, this is the ruling, this is the justice. These are the justices that agree with it. These are the justices that dissented from it. And so we don't really know why Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett ruled the way they did in this case. But again, I'm hopeful that if and when this case makes its way back up to the Supreme Court and the justices hear it on the merits, that they would reach the correct conclusion in the case.
Is there anything that can be done to force the Biden administration's hand on enforcing the border beyond, I don't know, maybe Congress defunding Department of Homeland Security or something? I mean, what could potentially be done to end this problem when you have a president that doesn't seem to care about open borders, nor does his Department of Homeland Security? Can Republicans do anything to stop this? Because obviously the Democrats aren't going to, because they don't want to.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, I think it's going to take political pressure for the Biden administration to change what it is doing. Now, certainly you mentioned defunding. Congress has the power of the purse. I think they're exploring options to use that power to try to force the Biden administration to do its jobs. They've threatened to impeach Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. So far, those threats have not seemed effective. And I'll be honest, even if he is impeached, and to be clear, he deserves to be impeached for not doing his job, it's likely someone else would just step into the role and continue non-enforcement. And so at the end of the day, I think it's going to take political pressure, both from Congress and from voters, to make clear that this current state of affairs is not acceptable, and that the Biden administration needs to start doing its job.
Yeah, it seems to me that Governor Greg Abbott, whom I have to give him credit, I really thought he was playing political theater. I appreciated the busing that both he and Governor DeSantis were doing across the country, busing illegal immigrants to different parts of the country and bringing attention or keeping attention on this issue, and they prevailed with that. But at some point, between then and or whatever, I thought Greg Abbott was just kind of doing stunts, if you will, but not really using the power and authority that he had as the governor. But it seems to me that he's there now. Texas is absolutely overwhelmed, and you look at, just like you mentioned earlier, Zach, all these other states that are saying, listen, we're overwhelmed. This stuff is affecting us. The homelessness, crime, just the overwhelming of the system, kind of the Cloward-Piven strategy, if you will. This is impacting all of us. So kudos to Governor Greg Abbott for doing exactly what he's done. Is there anything that you would be advising the governor to do at this point, Zach, as an attorney? And again, I'm speaking with Zach Smith of the Heritage Foundation. Real quick, Zach, where can people find you online?
Sure. You can follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at TZ Smith. That's at TZ Smith. You can also follow me at heritage.org and see everything I've written, as well as all of the great content my fellow Heritage colleagues have written as well. But look, Carl, at the end of the day, I think Governor Greg Abbott needs to stay the course. I hope other governors, other states will continue to support him in these efforts, because what's happening at the southern border is absolutely untenable. It's wreaking havoc across the country in a number of ways. And fortunately, I think voters are starting to wake up and see that. Unfortunately, so far, the Biden administration is still refusing to do its constitutional duty to enforce our immigration laws.
If Governor Greg Abbott keeps this pressure on, and he keeps, I said defying, but you clarified he isn't defying the Supreme Court order. But if he keeps this up, keeps this pressure on the Biden administration, do you foresee a scenario where, even with just Governor Greg Abbott, that this could end up in the Supreme Court, where that Arizona versus the United States, where that case is brought back to light and kind of dismantled?
Yes, certainly. I think that case will be challenged. I think that case, the court will be asked to overrule that precedent. Now, whether they will, I don't know. I certainly think they should. I'm hopeful that they should. And again, I think one of the justices to watch will be Chief Justice John Roberts, because if you think about several of the cases in the abortion context specifically, he's previously dissented from substantive rulings in previous cases, but when the court was asked to revisit those rulings, he agreed to uphold them. He said that the issue is decided, even though he disagrees with them on the merits, because of something called stare decisis, meaning the issue is decided essentially, that he would agree to uphold them. And so I think he'll be very interesting justice to watch and see what he rules, but I think Arizona versus United States, the states will be challenging that precedent in the not so distant future, I suspect.
Now, okay, so last question, and if there's anything else you feel like my audience needs to hear, please feel free to share it, Zach. But I wonder this: what does that, or what did that Arizona case eliminate for the states? I mean, is it if that case were to be reversed, what would that mean for other states? Does it mean that they could arrest illegal immigrants, deport them themselves? What does that look like if that case is reversed?
Yeah, it would essentially allow states to take a more proactive role in helping to enforce immigration laws, because right now their hands are tied. Essentially, the Supreme Court said they have no role to play. And so states could empower their law enforcement officers to help enforce federal immigration laws more directly, do something more than simply calling Border Patrol or Immigration Services whenever they stop someone for being in this country illegally. And again, allow states to really, use their authority, their sovereign authority, to protect their citizens, which is something that they currently cannot do, unfortunately. And I think that's part of the reason you're seeing Texas having to use many of these workarounds because of this Arizona versus United States decision.
Okay. All right, Zach, man, I appreciate you joining us again today and clarifying some of this stuff. And I'm praying that Governor Greg Abbott stays the course, and I'm so appreciative of you guys at the Heritage Foundation keeping us up to speed and keeping us informed on these type of issues, so that I'm not just blabbing out at the mouth and people can make sure they're getting some good information.
Well,
so anyway,
I appreciate you having me on, Carl. It's always a pleasure to be with you. And one of these days, we'll chat when it is not an unprecedented constitutional crisis.
No kidding. I suspect we'll be seeing probably a few more leading up to November, but we'll find out, I'm sure.
Great chatting, Carl. Thanks so much.
All right. Guys, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you go to get your podcast. That's Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and Rumble. On YouTube and Rumble, you can review the podcast there. That'll help us out tremendously. If you follow, subscribe, that would help us out, and just share the podcast. We would certainly appreciate that. And I appreciate you guys tuning in. Make sure you follow Zach Smith of the Heritage Foundation. You can check him out at heritage.org or on X, formerly known as Twitter, at TZ Smith. And I'm on all social media, whether it's X, Instagram, Facebook, True Social Getter, wherever I am, at The Carl Jackson Show, or simply at Carl Jackson Show. I appreciate you guys tuning in. And until next time, don't grow weary doing good. God bless you.